Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Well, we will get started. Continue to say hello in the chat. My name is Danielle Barnes. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the CEO of Women Talk Design. And I'm very thrilled to have you here for today's event. We are joined by the incredible Margot Bloomstein, who is a dear friend of Women Talk Design, a mentor. She's a content strategist. She's also a two-time author, which is what brings us here today to talk about publishing. And she's joined us before to talk about what about a book, like, if you even want to get started. And that was a couple years ago. And there's been a lot of conversation in our community about writing books, specifically about publishing books. And so we're so thrilled to have Margot joining us again to answer all of those questions. So the format of today's event, I have some questions to get us started, and then we're going to turn it over to you all. We want to hear your questions. So you can feel free to put them in the chat as we go. And then about halfway through the event, we'll really turn it over and start to answer those questions. But again, we want to make sure we can hear from you. There is live captioning turned on, so you can pull that up if you'd like to follow along there. And then we are recording this and we'll send it to folks that registered afterwards. So without further ado, let's get started. Margot, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I am stoked to be here. As you said, I always love chatting with the folks of Women Talk Design. And yeah, this is a wonderful opportunity, I think, to dig in on something that is near and dear to my heart. And that's having been in kind of different parts of the publishing process, as a writer, as somebody that had a book come out last year, I really champion the idea of other people going down that path, which might be a sort of like misery loves company type of thing. But no, I mean, I really love the idea of people saying, I have some ideas, I want to package them up in a new way. I think a book might be the right vehicle for that. Here's where I am now with my thinking. Here's where I'm doing this kind of thinking now. Here's where I want to go next with it. So I'm very, very excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So
yes,
how do you even get started? If you want to write a book, what's the first thing that you need to do?
I think the first thing that you should do is have your big idea. Whatever your idea is, figure out maybe how you can put it into words, how you can maybe put it into words in different ways, how you can make it bigger and share it with someone else. Because I think that's where our ideas start to grow legs, when we can express them in different ways to different people. And for me, with my first book that came out in 2012, and then most recently with the book last year, in both cases, I had been writing a little bit on the subject, speaking on the subject a lot, like bringing it out at different conferences. I had done like the 15-minute talk version of it. I had done the 45-minute talk. I had a 3-hour workshop version of it. And in both cases, people had said to me like, hey, so is this going to be a book? It feels like the structure is right for it. And they were right. It did work pretty well for it. But I feel like that process of having your idea that you can put into words different ways, that's a good way to establish it, to prove it out, and then figure out, okay, how else can I tell this story? So for me, that was the process of doing it in a talk and the steps that go into going from like an abstract to maybe an outline to then putting it in a visual format on slides, telling it to somebody this way, and then figuring it out in the form of a book proposal and the different parts of that. Like, how do you kind of have like the 30-second version of it? We can talk more about the structure of a book proposal, but I feel like the place to get started is by talking about it, putting it into words so that you can say, here's my big idea. This is what I think. This is what I think about this idea. This is the premise of my idea.
Yeah. And what's the difference? I know we've talked a little bit about this. What's the difference between a premise, a topic, and an idea? Are those all the same things, or are there kind of like different levels of, what these terms mean?
So I think sometimes we do use them a little bit interchangeably. But what I learned in going through the proposal development process with my developmental editor, Jill Swenson, she helped steer me in a direction and put some good reading in front of me. There's a book by Joel Schwartzberg, and I meant to have it like sitting right here in front of me so that I could like, no, it's not me. You're getting a sense of just how messy my office is. The fact that I'm like, where is this book? Somewhere around here. Has anybody seen it? The book by Joel Schwartzberg called Get to the Point. And it's a short book. He kind of takes his own medicine, takes his own guidance there. It's a really short book about how to take your big idea and break it down into a premise to say, well, this is the topic. In other words, this is the subject. And that's what I would say is really the topic. Like my topic might be content strategy, or my topic might be building trust through content.
Mm-hmm.
The premise, though, is sort of your point. Like what's the point and how is it actionable for other audiences? And that's where you can say the sort of like the so what about it. So your topic might be content strategy or typography, design, whatever it is. Maybe it's the history in the Gilded Age, but your premise might be something like the history of the Gilded Age is still playing out in the modern day industries that occupy the cities that were affected by the Gilded Age. In this book, I'm going to be exploring why we should be paying attention to those industries and see the impact of the Gilded Age as it plays out in wait staff, maybe the tourism industry and architecture, something like that. Or like the premise of my book, Trustworthy, was that trust is in short supply. We are increasing in cynicism. We are losing trust, and that's undermining marketing in every industry. Mm-hmm. But in every industry, regardless of the size of the organization, you can build trust by addressing content and design through a 3-part framework. And here's that framework.
Yeah, great.
So that's like the difference between the topic
and then starting to summarize it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And being able to articulate that premise, I think that's the thing that hooks potential readers, potential reviewers, and a potential publisher too.
It also probably helps focus you in the process, right? Yes. If you have almost too broad of an idea and haven't really come up with that premise, your book might be all over the place.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that process of, submitting a proposal and finding a publisher. But before we do, I'm curious, how long does this whole process take? So like you have an idea. Mm-hmm. What is the realistic, like, okay, I'm going to get a book out into the world?
I think some of that depends on the type of book and the place where you are looking to publish it and the type of audience you're trying to reach. So my first book, the topic was content strategy. I guess the premise was, here's why content strategy matters in kind of our emerging industry of web design. This is kind of in ye old days. And here's why it matters to people in design, people in project management, people in SEO and development, kind of was broken out that way. And I think the time from like the first discussions that I had with a publisher about it to it coming out, maybe about 16 months, okay. Which maybe a year to 16 months, which is really, really speedy. And some of that depends on where the publisher is printing it. There are fewer and fewer big printing houses in North America. Frequently more things are published in China, so then they have to get back here and all, if this is where you're looking to focus a lot of your distribution. Mm-hmm. As far as finding a publisher, that can be a longer dance or a shorter dance, depending on how easy it is for a publisher to look at your proposal, understand your premise, and say, oh, that will be a successful product for us. And in publishing Trustworthy, that process took me a couple of years, I think, of writing and rewriting, developing a proposal, redeveloping a proposal, querying publishers. and figuring out where it would fit. And that's because that idea of getting that perfect fit, that can be really, really hard. And I wanted to share just a couple of other things that I've read on that lately. Just today, Amanda Lewis published a pretty long post on LinkedIn. She's an editor. She was previously an editor at my publisher at Page Two. She's now an independent editor. She wrote this long post that she began with saying, basically paraphrasing something that Dan Savage says, that when we think about dating and whatnot, when we think about like that process of finding a perfect match or something, that whole process, he says every relationship you are in will fail until one doesn't. And I think for some people, until one doesn't, and then other things fail, and then maybe another one doesn't fail. But that process of finding that perfect fit can take a while, but a book only needs one publisher. The process of that one publisher finding you and you finding that one publisher, that's a bit of magic that needs to happen. And that process can involve a lot of rejection that takes time. Beyond Amanda, Mary Andrew wrote something recently. I'll post it in the chat, where she said, I've met folks who get jobs easily, get acceptance easily, or in relationships really easily. But guess what? They're not always the brightest bulbs on the porch. They're generally just palatable to most people, but so is water. So are IKEA dressers. Who cares? And I read that and I was like, yes, who wants to be an IKEA dresser that is just generally acceptable to most people? Because if your perspective, if your idea is unique and so exciting that no one has written about it before, with your unique spin and your unique perspective, well, then you're trying to advance an idea that that a publisher may not yet believe in, or that most publishers may not yet find generally palatable, like an IKEA dresser. So that process of kind of finding your perfect fit with a publisher that says, oh, this idea is unique, but this idea fits with the kind of product that we can sell to the audiences that we tend to reach. And getting that kind of perfect match takes time. But that's also what you want, because you want a publisher that's going to say, your thing, that's the type of thing that we know how to sell. That's the type of thing where we already have reviewers on the hook that know how to review this kind of thinking. And that's what you want to reach your audience.
Yeah, that's good advice. It's a good reminder to not give up, even if something's not working right away.
Yeah, yeah.
And so how do you even begin to go about finding a publisher? Is it like, I feel like it can seem like a world of, you have to have a lot of access to all these people who know people, which, not everyone does. It's definitely a privilege to be there. And so how do you go about finding a publisher? How do you make those connections? Like, how does that process work?
I think a lot of it comes down to how you've built your network in other ways. So I'll say for kind of this audience in Women Talk Design, where most of us are working in different fields of design or adjacent to design, I would say look at how other people are getting their ideas out in the industry. And if it's somebody that like you've seen speak a lot, if they've got a book out, see where they've published it. Develop that relationship, ask them to introduce you to their publisher or to the acquisitions editor there. I think a lot of it comes down to those sort of introductions so that they can say like, yeah, I published with A Book Apart or with Rosenfeld or with Wiley. And here's what my experience was like. Here's who I worked with. Here's why I would want to work with these people again. And they may also be able to push back and say, that idea, that premise that you're talking about sounds great, but maybe not for my publisher. Have you thought about these others? And I think that's a really good way to go for a lot of books and a lot of the thinking that is kind of common within our industry, where we want to get it out to kind of a niche industry audience. In other cases, though, if you're trying to reach more of maybe a mass market audience, or maybe more of like a general marketing audience, let's say, or general business audience, it might be more appropriate for you to work with an academic publisher or with a business publisher, one of like the big 5 publishers. And I think in all of those cases, it really pays to work with a literary agent, sometimes a developmental editor that also operates as a literary agent, that can help steer you in the right direction and take you through the process of how you have to put together a formal proposal for those types of publishers, the structure that they'll be expecting, the tone, and sort of like bona fides that you can list out in there that they would be expecting. And then they'll also be able to take you through and really shepherd you through the querying process there too, which is much more formal, much more structured, but it's kind of a matter of playing by the rules of that part of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like, kind of like you shared, there's a lot of different types of publishers. And I know you talked about maybe kind of more within your industry, some broader ones. I know, can you talk a little bit too about maybe publishing models? I believe the publisher you worked with is a hybrid publisher. I know there's a self-publishing. Like, can you talk a little bit about, I guess, even just ways in which to publish and some of the things to know about each of those?
Sure. Yeah. So there's kind of the big traditional publishing models that have historically operated as gatekeepers for better and worse. And I think it's important to acknowledge sort of both sides of that. I'll start with the for worse angle. With many of the big publishers, especially kind of with the economics affecting the industry now, if they're going to take the time to invest in a book, invest in marketing a book, which is only going to happen for authors at the top of their list, if they're going to take the time and money to print the book, which becomes more and more expensive because paper has become more and more expensive, they want to know that it's a sure thing, that it's a product that will sell well. And I think it's sort of like any industry that's thinking about investing in kind of an unknown quantity, a new product. And as a new author, that's what you are. You're a new untested product for them. And I think to kind of get into that stream is pretty difficult. The gatekeeping that they bring to it is saying, well, we only want to work with authors that we already know will do well. We only want to work with authors that are of the type that we know we already sell well, which might be other academics, people that can say that they're a professor at this university, or are behind this big TED Talk. In other words, people that have already kind of gotten in to that industry, where the door has already kind of been open for them. In many cases, if you're looking at business publishing, the people that are already selling well because they've already kind of gotten those contracts are white men. So there's definitely a lot of gatekeeping there. I will say the kind of the positive side of that gatekeeping is that when you work with one of those publishers, they want to make sure that the product that you're making and that they're selling, that they're putting their name there on the spine, they want to make sure that it hits a certain mark of quality. So their team will include multiple professional editors, copy editors and line editors, developmental editor if you need that, to help ensure that your product is good and that they can sell it. You'll also be buying into, effectively, their existing distribution network. There's going to be people on their team that will sell your product into university bookstores, into to a degree into the conference circuit, but I think some of that also comes down to the author doing that work themselves, and will help broker the conversation between maybe big corporations that want to hire in an author as a speaker to come bring 500 copies of their book. Also, if you want to be able to get your book in airport bookstores, if that becomes like a real valuable thing again, you kind of have to pay to play. Airport bookstores won't work with people that are self-published, but they will work with people whose books have come through more traditional publishing processes and traditional publishing houses. I will say, though, that can include publishers that are hybrid publishers. And that's where we can get into looking beyond traditional publishing and looking more at self-publishing. Now, that's kind of a broad continuum. When we talk about self-publishing, it can be Amazon Create Space at one end, where you're basically getting an ISBN number and a space on Amazon. You're getting that distribution network, but that's really all you're getting. You need to provide an editor. You need to bring onto your team a designer, if that's what you need, somebody to do maybe the typesetting, an indexer, all of those people that have a hand in the process, maybe a project manager to ensure that the writer, you, is getting things done on time as well. And that can be totally appropriate for some authors and totally inappropriate for others, depending on how they work and who they're trying to reach, the audience they're trying to reach. So that's kind of, I think, one end of self-publishing. Around them, there's also like Lulu. That's a way to self-publish books where you don't need a huge distribution network. Maybe you're creating a recipe book for an organization in which you're involved, or a family history type thing that you're only distributing to your family. That can give you the kind of quality that you want without getting kind of layering in all the other necessary components of other parts of publishing. But at the other end of the self-publishing spectrum are the hybrid publishers, where an author has skin in the game, needs to make a financial investment in their own product, but they're hiring the services of a publisher that is providing a distribution network, editorial team, project management, designers, people that have been through the process before and know how it should go. So you're kind of buying their experience, buying their network, sometimes their network of other authors as well, that will be on hand to help lift your book and help bring visibility to it. And that's kind of the approach that I took with Trustworthy. I realized, like with my first book, I published it with the Morgan Kaufman division of Elsevier. Like, I think Elsevier might be the world's oldest publisher. I don't know if they go back to like Gutenberg times, but I think it's like that type of organization. And that was great because Morgan Kaufman, they're a good way to get in front of more academic audiences. They're also a good way to get in front of a lot of conferences. And it was a good way for me to get what I wanted to out of a book at the time. We should talk about that more too, like why you should even publish a book. For Trustworthy, I wanted to reach a broader, more mass market kind of trade audience. And for that, I did query the more traditional publishers. I had gotten an offer from one of them and realized that it would be, how can I put this? It was kind of too expensive for me to take on. And that's because many traditional publishers, if you're a newer author, they want you to have some skin in the game. They'll want you to do a buyback, which means buying back a number of copies of your own book so that you can sell it. You can take part in the sales effort by selling it everywhere you might be speaking it, everywhere, every conference at which you might appear. You're going to have like a table at the back of the room, that sort of thing. And the offer that they had extended to me included a buyback. When they asked about that, I thought it might be like 1,000 books or something. Turned out it was more like 5,000 books that were going to be on pallets in my garage or basement that I'd be carrying in suitcases to conferences. And I wanted to do hardcover, and I was like, I do not have the biceps for that. No, I would have the biceps afterward. But when it comes time to think about like why you're writing a book, I wasn't writing a book to get biceps. In this case, I was writing a book because I wanted to get out in front of that broader audience to affect change across a variety of different industries, not just design and content strategy anymore. And I knew that I wanted to work with a professional publisher that would be able to help me produce that kind of product that already had an existing distribution network for it. And I also knew that I wanted to make money off the book, not just invest a lot of money in the book. So it ended up making more sense for me to work with a hybrid publisher where the percentage, the cut that the author receives is much higher than what you get in working with a traditional publisher. So the money made sense, the process made sense. I knew that I didn't have the organizational skills to use like Amazon Create Space and go in that direction, and that I wanted to work with a professional editorial team. So this was the right way for me to produce that product.
Yeah, there's so many different things to consider as you've shared through your process of, your goals, the distribution channels, the partnership, the, economics of it ultimately at the end of the day. So I appreciate you giving some insight into that. And I'm sure we might have some follow-up questions about it.
And none of that has to do with like either the creative process or your process as a writer. It's all like the business of it and the why behind the what.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about this, and I don't know if it's something you can quantify, but when you're thinking about writing a book, like how much of it is actually writing a book versus all of these other things, right? Like all of these other decisions, all of this other work. We're going to talk about marketing in a little bit. Like how much of it is actually writing a book?
Oof. I can tell you how things worked out for me, but so much of that I think is dependent on the individual's goals as an author, what you want that book to accomplish and to what audience, and what you want it to do for you in your career. And also kind of your personality too. Like I think like a lot of what I did in the writing process, my developmental editor, she would be like the right person to ask about this, because she was the person that was oftentimes cracking the whip and saying, write already. Actually, I still have a Post-it note up every time like I emailed her and I was like, I haven't been able to write because this is happening, or this is going on in the world, or I feel like I need to respond to this other thing, or I want to research this more. And she told me, do the thing that you can do, write the damn book. And she was right. That's where I needed to focus my energy over the past couple of years. That's a hard thing to do sometimes when it feels like the world is on fire around you. And those fires are very relevant to your book. It's a little Fahrenheit 451 in there, but all things are circular. I think the process of writing for me is the process of research and thinking, teasing out ideas, writing about kind of circularly about those ideas, storytelling, doing a lot of storytelling around those ideas, and then finally committing them to paper. But in figuring out how to tell those stories, I had to do research into my target audience. And I think that is relevant for every author, because for your book to achieve some sort of change, to motivate or inspire people in some way, you need to understand those people. You need to do that. So I needed to do the market research to understand my target audience, as with any product. And I also needed to understand, well, if I'm writing this book, why should I write it? And why is this book necessary? To what is it relevant? So to understand why I needed to do it, I needed to understand, well, who else has written books on similar topics? What's the perspective that they bring to it? What can I add that is unique? And then for this book to sit on a shelf alongside theirs, because that's how it's going to be shelved, what makes this book relevant and necessary now? So that involved doing kind of comparative research or competitive research and gathering all of that. So that kind of market analysis, understanding the target audience and the comparative research, that all goes into the proposal process. And I say the process because it both went into the proposal that then went out to different publishers, but it's also then what kept me focused through the process of writing, so that I always knew, well, to whom am I writing this? And I have pictures of some of the people in my target audience, like on Post-it notes, and I would sometimes pause and think, I need to convince, like one of the people was this guy, Javon. And I was like, so I know that he's a creative director. I know that he has this stuff going on. I need to convince him. Am I writing something that is plausible and convincing to him? If not, I need to maybe bring other research into it, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's great. So including that research time, how long would you say it took you to write the book? I know that you said that you were researching for a couple of years to figure out which, I think development or which publishers you wanted to go with, but for the researching and writing the book? How long did that take?
So through the proposal process, I was also writing because I wanted to have a sample chapter in there. I had chapter summaries in there for the other chapters. In order to write those chapter summaries, I needed to outline them first. My outlines kept getting beefier and beefier. So the process of thinking through a book evolves directly. It's a smooth continuum, I think, into the process of researching and writing a book. At least for me, it is. I would say 6 years, because that's when I started researching this topic and developing talks about it. And some of the language that I used in those talks, like my ideas evolved a lot through them. The examples that I gathered evolved a lot through those talks. But some of the phrases and some of like the big points were there 6 years ago. The process of actually writing those final things that evolved into chapters, that was maybe, I would say, a 6 or an 8 month process.
Would you say it was similar for your first book?
It was, the timeline was compressed, but it had most of the same steps in it. Because with that book, I had developed this talk that had a beginning, a middle that had subsections, and a big so what kind of end. That's the structure of the book as well. It sort of has a narrative arc, but that arc isn't something that I knew that I needed until writing the second book. And in that talk, I had been gathering examples, going through that research process. When I sat down to write, I think that was more of a stumbling block in that first book. And at the time, I remember I had done all of this research. It's easy for me to kind of bury myself in gathering case studies. And I was a little scared to start writing because I didn't know what the tone should be, kind of how I should be structuring my chapters. And I was at South by Southwest. I was doing a talk there, and I bumped into, oh gosh, I can't remember her name, an editor that I had worked with from Krista Stevens, who was an editor at A List Apart at the time. And she's like, so how's the book going? And I was like, horrible, I'm scared to write. And she's like, oh, so what else, what are you writing now? What are you working on? And at the time I had a client for whom I was doing research and writing stories that around different parts of their business to basically help other people in the organization understand like what went on in production, what went on in sourcing, what went on in marketing, that type of stuff. And I loved writing those stories. They were really character driven. The research was fun. The writing was fun. And I was telling her about that. And she was like, well, write the book the same way. If you love that kind of storytelling, lean into that kind of storytelling. And then it became easy to take my talk, take my outline, and make it into chapters.
Awesome. Yeah. And I want to thank Rachel for that question. I didn't mention that when I asked it. And a follow-up question that she asked was, if you worked full time during that whole 6 years, or if there was a point that you took off to focus on your writing.
So I should say I'm self-employed, and the way my business is structured, I do a lot of work directly with clients, but I also do a lot of work with agencies that bring me in as kind of the content strategy resource, working with their clients. For the types of clients that I work with, oftentimes it's end-to-end content strategy. Sometimes they just bring me in for a workshop that kicks off an internal content strategy project. The way I get clients, in many ways, most of my marketing is through speaking. So at the time I was speaking, pre-COVID, speaking at a lot of conferences, more than, I would say, like 12 to 20 a year, and on the road a decent amount for that. So that was kind of how I was getting my name out. That was also how I was starting to have people ring in and say, oh, you're talking about these issues in trust. Have you studied this company and what they're doing on this? So sometimes I was getting good input for the book as well as testing out the ideas for the book. So that was my full-time job. And then probably around 4 to 6 months before the all-in date on my manuscript, I pulled back, stop taking on new clients so that I could finish the manuscript, so that I could write the damn book and not have my editor be completely upset with me all the time.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to invite everyone to start to, continue to put questions in the chat. I have some more questions specifically about the marketing side, which Margot was just talking a little bit about, of publishing a book. But I want to make sure that in this time we can answer your questions as well. So if you put them in the chat, we will make sure to answer them. So Margot, I want to talk a little bit about marketing. You talked about how, sometimes publishers help with this depending on, who you're working with and what format you go to. I'm curious, when do you start marketing the book? Is it like at the end, once you've written it? Is it in the beginning, once you've, signed the contract that you're doing it? And like, what if you're not a marketer? Like, what if you're not someone who feels comfortable marketing? Like, how do you even get started?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would push back and say, what does it mean to be a marketer for your own ideas? I think for me, like when I'm really excited about a project, I tell a lot of people about it. Especially if, well, no, I should say, assuming I'm not under NDA, I want to tell people about it, especially if they're in kind of like a related industry where I'm like, oh, maybe your thinking could help kind of gel with mine. With a book, I feel like it's a little bit harder because I'm somebody that I see other people tweet out like, I'm working on a book. And I see that and I think, good for you. But what if something happens? What if you have to like shelve it for a while? Don't jinx yourself. So for me, what I was telling people for a while was that I was working on a new writing project. And people would say like, oh, when is the book out? I was like, well, the new writing project. We're not using the B word yet. Here's where I am. This is the kind of research that I'm doing. And I think that process of socializing your ideas not only can help inform your research, but you're probably talking about it with people that are in your target audience and they're going to be excited about it. Maybe they'll tell their friends as well. For many authors, that's how they start to build their list. And that idea of, as an author, you're your own best marketer, unless you are at a publisher where you are kind of top of the list for them. If you're Stephen King, your publisher is going to do a lot of marketing for you. If you're everybody else, you're your own best marketer. And maybe you're working with an agent or hiring a PR firm that's going to help ensure that you're speaking at different literary festivals and book events, maybe helping you book different readings and whatnot after the book comes out, maybe helping to secure you spots on different podcasts that will be relevant. But still, you need to have a good product, both the book and yourself as an author, to be able to put out there. So for many authors, what they're doing when they start to socialize their ideas is building their list, maybe getting people to subscribe to their newsletter to find out more on that topic, to get updates about how the book is going when they can read a sample chapter. They're asking people to sign up to be an early reviewer or to be a part of, maybe it's their street team or their team that's going to really build the buzz around the idea. And I think for some people, for some authors, that works really well. That also can work really well for when you go to query different publishers and they say, well, what's the size of your audience? How many subscribers do you have to your newsletter? For me, I didn't have a newsletter. I'm not somebody that writes that way. And it was challenging getting like people signing up, getting people opting in to champion the book, to do early reviews and all, because that kind of marketing didn't come naturally to me. But instead, reaching out to the network that I had already built on Twitter, the sort of more corporate colleague side of my Facebook account, folks on LinkedIn, to say, here's this new writing project. Would love if you have any ideas. And then every time I did a talk, tweeting out links to that, sharing the slides, getting people's perspective on it, that helped build the buzz. And then as the book was going, well, as it was evolving, as like we were creating and reviewing different ideas for the cover design. That's stuff that I shared with people who had signed up for my growing and small newsletter that came with the promise of, don't worry, you won't hear from me that much because I don't intend to write a newsletter that much. I shared that stuff with them. I also shared it on LinkedIn and on Twitter to kind of keep building that buzz around it. People like to see that sort of like visual evidence. Every time I did a talk, I would usually include some sort of like behind the scenes screenshot or whatever, even if it was on Zoom. And then as sample chapters were available, or as the manuscript became available and I could send it out to people that had opted in to be those early reviews for like the praise pages up in the front, I was doing that and then sharing everything on social media too. So I think if you're not comfortable with marketing with a capital M, that's okay. Lean into the thing that you are comfortable with and what you're already doing naturally. And I think that can go really far with kind of building the kind of audience and the kind of impact that you want.
Yeah, it's helpful to hear your journey too about how you started to recruit all these people, especially, I know when you first mentioned a newsletter, I'm like, I'm sure a lot of people are like, I don't have a newsletter. So just starting to build that as you start to build out this idea. Yeah, that's great. We have a couple questions that came in through the chat that I want to ask. One is from Kimberly. When can you shop an idea for a book and get paid ahead of time versus shopping around an already written manuscript?
So some of that depends on the type of book you're writing, if it's fiction or nonfiction, and also the type of publisher that you're seeking. There are some publishers that want to have a hand in helping you bring your idea, finalize your idea, and bring it to the marketplace. Within like the hybrid publishing space, Idea Press, they're a wonderful, wonderful publisher. I had spoken with them. Kind of going through a similar process that I described, where I reached out to people that I knew had already been down this path, had books that I admired. And I said, tell me about working with your publisher. What do you recommend? And in some cases, they made wonderful introductions for me. But there, I know they like being able to have a hand in helping to shape the manuscript before it's done. And those are largely business books. With my publisher, Page Two, they're not looking for you to just come with ideas. They want to know that premise, but I think there are some authors that come to them and already have the manuscript completely done. They really just need like final editorial review and to work with the design team to make this a real final product. If you're writing a memoir, I think that's an industry where they do expect the manuscript to be done, but again, in other cases, depending on the type of book, they may only want to see a sample chapter. So I can only really answer for the types of books that I have written. That really would depend probably on the type of publisher, the specific publisher, and the type of book that you want to write. So that's something where it would be helpful to talk with a literary agent. And many of them on their websites, they'll include a lot of this information too. So dig into those FAQs.
Yeah. And how do you find a literary agent? That's just research?
Yeah, research in some cases. I think similar to finding a publisher, talk with authors in the industry that you want to target, that you admire, or maybe where you're already friends with them, or you admire the thing that they've created and you feel comfortable reaching out to them. Every author loves hearing from readers saying, your book really inspires me. Here's how I use it, or here's what I love about it. And, that may be a way to kind of start brokering that kind of engagement. In my case, I had a rough time like beginning that process of querying publishers. I was working sort of with somebody else that was kind of new to the world of literary agency. And it didn't go so well. And I was talking with a colleague who's a creative director and a designer and head of an academic program in design. And he was like, oh, you should talk with Jill Swenson, who's my literary agent and developmental editor. And he had known her because she had been, I think, a literature and writing professor in his undergraduate program. So it was a friend making an introduction. but I think it's those friends that we say, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's the tough time that I'm having. Those people kind of maybe on the edges of your network that can say, oh, you should talk to this person. I think those are some good avenues to explore.
Great, thanks. And Rachel asked, can you talk more about payment models and what to expect around this? So percentage of sales, advances, what can folks expect when it comes to, money?
Yeah, so I think over the past, I guess, 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of compression in the industry around the finances and how you finance a book and where money is exchanging hands. By that, I mean, when I was working on content strategy at work, that came out 2012. And even though I was a first-time author for a book that was going to have a fairly niche audience, kind of just the web industry, I received a small advance, I think of maybe like $5,000 or so, which I was like, this is great. I didn't expect anything, but that's cool. And I did not write that book, though, to make money. I didn't want to lose money at it, but because I was working with a traditional publisher, I wasn't investing any of my own money, just time, which has a monetary value. And when we talk about like, why do you write a book? The reason that I wanted to write a book, that evolved over time. I want to stick to your question for right now, though. So when I started to work on Trustworthy a few years later, what I was hearing more and more from friends that had written books recently that were not top of list books was that they might have received a few $1,000s in an advance, but most of the time they hadn't. And with most publishers now including a buyback, they weren't receiving an advance. They were having to pony up maybe $20,000. And working with a traditional publisher, you might only make, like on a $25 book, maybe you see $2 or $3 a book, maybe that. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but I think that's kind of typical until you've sold, like, say 10,000 copies, and then they may adjust that. So that's why for me, like, going down that path just did not make sense financially. And I think with that kind of approach of the buyback, I know when I had gotten that offer that included that, I turned to a community of other business authors that I knew on Facebook to say, is this common? Is this typical? And that's where I heard from many of them that were much more published, much more visible. They all had like big lists and newsletters and whatnot, where I was hearing from them like, yeah, this is common, but wait, you only had to buy 5,000 copies? I had to buy 10,000 copies of my book. That's actually not so bad. And hearing that was eye-opening and sobering. That's when I realized, like, oh, wait, why am I doing this again? But that's what pushed me more toward hybrid publishing. And there, yes, you have to make an upfront investment, depending on the type of publisher you go to. As I said, it's kind of a broad spectrum from Amazon CreateSpace to there's some mid-tier hybrid publishers that don't offer very much as far as like editorial review, but maybe they do have a bit of a distribution network, to then at the far end of that, where there's Idea Press, Page Two, a few other players that have a full editorial team and a sales and distribution team and a marketing team. And there, your investment might be more in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, but then you make much more on every book. Where you might be making, say, 50% on books that are sold at retail. And then the books that they hold for you that you are selling maybe at your own events, or because, like in my case, when I'm going to speak to a client, sometimes I'll be bundling books into that. Then you might be making like 90% of the cost of the book.
Great. And then for self-publishing, I mean, it's most of the cost. I mean, most of the profits you keep, I imagine.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I mean, like with that end of self-publishing, with the hybrid publishing. And at the other end of it, like Amazon CreateSpace, I don't know as much about that, but I don't think you have to invest as much unless you're hiring an editor, hiring an indexer, et cetera. And yeah, the money is all yours.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I saw another come through from Kimberly. What are the disadvantages of publishing only through Amazon as an example? So I know you said, again, don't have as much experience with this, but if you're going a self-publishing route or, only having certain distribution channels, what are advantages to that?
So it may limit where your book can go, but that might be okay. And that's where it sort of goes to, well, what are you trying to accomplish with your book? Where do you need it to go? There are some events that will only bring in books for their bookstore from booksellers that are associated with Ingram. Ingram is the distributor for all major publishers, period. They don't handle self-published books though. If you want your book in an airport bookstore, again, they don't work with self-published authors because they don't work directly with authors. They'll only work with publishers. If that matters to you, then it matters. I will say, if that matters to you, it's entirely pay for play. I think last time I looked, to have your book on a shelf in all of the Hudson bookstores, so in basically all the airports in the US, I want to say it was like $4,500 for 6 months, or maybe it was 3 months. And if you wanted it on a table instead, then it was even more. So again, it's all pay for play, but it's like you have to be in a certain league in order to play to begin with. Now, again, that only matters though, if it matters to you. So if your purpose in getting a book is just to have a leave behind for clients so that when you leave that meeting, you're able to say, here's 5 copies of my book. Please share it within your marketing team. Let me know if you have any questions. If you're distributing it, you don't need to worry about where it's coming from or how it's being distributed elsewhere. So that can be enough. So it really goes to understand why you're writing a book and what you hope to get out of it. If you're writing it because you hope to turn around a substantial profit, then that's a different question than if you're writing it simply to get your name out there or to have your name be more memorable with a certain audience. My first book, I knew that I wanted to write it because I wanted my ideas around content strategy to reach a broader audience than I could reach with them just coming to hear me speak at conferences. A book gives your ideas more permanence and more mobility. Also, for some of the conferences where I wanted to speak, I looked down their speaker list and I saw it was all so-and-so, author of blah, so-and-so, author of blah. I wanted to be a so-and-so that was an author of blah. That's what it allowed me to do. With this more recent book, I had other goals, so I needed to seek out a different publisher.
Yeah. I know we have more questions in the chat, but I do want to wrap things up because we're so close to time. Margot, the last question I wanted to ask, there's so much that you shared today and there's so much that goes into publishing a book. So if anyone is feeling maybe a little overwhelmed and is like, I want to do this, but like, what do I even do now leaving this call? What would be your advice for them?
I would say, and let me just preface it by saying, if you do have any remaining questions, best way to reach me, tweet me at @mbloomstein. That's usually best way to both reach me and to get your ideas out in front of a broader audience too. I would say the first thing you should do is gather your ideas. Think about how you can condense that premise maybe into a paragraph or into a sentence. Tell the world what makes your idea specific and unique and relevant, and build out from there, and then see other places where you can share it. Because a book is not the right way to share all ideas. But I think, again, if you want to make your ideas more portable and more permanent, it's a good place to start.
Awesome. That's great. So thank you so much, Margot, for sharing your experience and your advice. I know you learned so much in this process over the years, and we're grateful to have you sharing all of this with the Women Talk Design community. Thank you for everyone who came and asked such good questions. I'm excited. We're all excited for the ideas that you will get out there in the world. I hope that you will stay in touch with Women Talk Design. We have an online community space where you can talk to other people in the community and start to share your ideas there, ask more questions, offer perspective. And then we will be following up. We'll send the recording to this as well as a feedback survey. We always want to hear from you and more ways to stay involved. We'll share Margot's Twitter information there as well, and a link to her website and ways to stay in touch with Women Talk Design. So thank you all so much. Thanks, Margot. Thanks, Frances, for helping behind the scenes from the Women Talk Design team. And thanks to all of you.
Thank you.